Oh, hey, how's it going? So, I heard you want to be a dungeon master, but you don't feel like you're good enough, huh? Well, I'm here to tell you that you're absolutely right. You're not good enough to be a dungeon master. As long as you keep thinking like that. What's up, everyone? I'm Kojo Denojo, and this is the D&D Dojo. Today, we're going to be talking about what does it mean to be good enough to be a dungeon master. Being a dungeon master is a lot of work. You're the one that has to come up with the story. You have to get people together. You have to make sure their characters are good and all this other stuff. It's a lot of work, and sometimes it feels like it's too much. And sometimes it feels like it requires a skill level to it. I mean, the word master is in the title, so it makes sense. But some games that you're the keeper, you're something else. I only know Dungeon Master and Keeper. But there's plenty of other tabletop RPGs besides D&D where they have a game master. That's the general term if dungeons aren't involved or the word dungeons not in the title, but the idea that you are the master of the game puts pressure on you. And today we're going to talk about how to alleviate that pressure and some things that we can think about to really remind us that it's not as bad as we think it is. As an opening disclaimer, this is not a tips or advice video for how to be a dungeon master. This is a video to go over the things stopping us from being a dungeon master and how to get past that. So if you're looking for tips like how to plan better or what are some things to think about, such as how to plan a session zero, that may be better off to other YouTubers or other videos, or hell, maybe at this point I've already made a video and it's going to be linked up here. But if you're here to try to get over that hump and being a dungeon master, you're saying to yourself you're not good enough, well, we're going to explore some things that make us feel like that and how we can get past that. We're going to start off with a big one, and that is the Matt Mercer effect. The Matt Mercer effect, if you've lived under a rock and don't know what that is, and somehow came across my video of all videos on YouTube, first of all, thank you for being here. I hope you'll like, comment, and subscribe, saying, how did I stumble upon this rabbit hole? And I also want to give a shout out to YouTube Senpai for giving me this algorithm blessing. But the Matt Mercer effect, very quickly, because if you're here, you probably know what it is the fact that Critical Role had an impact on the D&D community. Whether you think it's a good one or a bad one, that's really a subject for debate. Most people would say it was kind of bad, though. Hence why when you say the Matt Mercer effect, it's never for a good reason. What it is, again, very briefly, is that because of the popularity of Critical Role, this led to a lot of people coming to D&D, and their first experience with it was a dungeon master who was Matt Mercer. And the players were all voice actors and actresses, and it led to people thinking that this was the standard for D&D. But it's not, both in terms of production value, number one, and just how the games run. And how Matt runs his games isn't wrong. It's just how he runs his games. Just like how I run my games is different from how he does it, and how you run your games will be different from how we do it. Every table is different, and even within the table, different dungeon masters run games differently. And that's just how D&D works. But unfortunately, because people's first experience with D&D was Critical Role, this led to the Matt Mercer effect, and they thought everything was just like on the show. So this led to a lot of people who would criticize their DMs who would say, well, that's not how Matt would rule it. That's not how it would work on Critical Role. And this can lead to people shutting down because they don't want to be told that they're not like a celebrity or they're not like some big shot voice actor, stuff like that. This also led to other things like players making knockoff characters of characters from Critical Role, bring it into their friends' D&D games, and just being completely chaotic, saying, well, this is what this character would have done on Critical Role. And it just was a big mess. So, as far as the Matt Mercer effect, how we can get around it, you just have to recognize the sign. And trust me, someone from Critical Role will tell you they are from Critical Role. And you have to just take it as someone who doesn't know better. It's hard because sometimes from the RPG horror stories, and there's plenty of them that came up from this, they may be unwilling to waver from this because in their mind the standard was on a TV show. Why would they make an entire show about something if it was wrong? And they just have to understand that in D&D there's really not a whole lot of wrong, but there's a lot of different. So it's up to you. If you want to play with them, you can continue to try and convince them that just this is different, or you can say, you know what, I'm going to cut my losses, go find another table, buddy. Because remember, you're the dungeon master. you can say that even to your best friends, as hard as that might be. I definitely have not done that, so I wouldn't blame you if you didn't either. Anyways, but long story short, the whole thing with the Matt Mercer effect has left a honestly a stain on the D&D community that when people talk about Critical Role, it has become a red flag. You can be a fan of Critical Role. Personally, I'm not a huge fan just cuz I don't really like watching people play D&D when I could be playing it myself, but there are people who are fans of Critical Role and they are still good D&D players or dungeon masters. So if somebody says they like Critical Role, don't take that as a red flag, but I would definitely keep an eye on them. Just like if they said they liked any other kind of online D&D group, even ones that I do personally like Dimension 20 was one I watched for quite a bit, and I am a fan of Legends of Evantris. So I guess a little bit of a hypocritical statement from what I said before of how I don't like watching people play D&D. It got me, YouTube. It's on the internet now. Another big one that makes a lot of people think they're not good enough to be dungeon masters is knowing the rules. Now, when it comes to D&D, the rules are subjective. And not only that, we are expecting an update very soon, later this year in fact, on the 5th edition rule set. Some people are calling it 1 D&D, some people are calling it D&D 5.5. Either way, we're getting an update later this year. And this is going to change a lot of things. Some people have already made plenty of videos on how it's good, so it's bad, it's in the middle for different classes, for different things. So it's already a time of change for D&D. And so let's also talk about other systems too. Maybe you want to play something else that has a more rooted system like Call of Cthulhu, or maybe you want to play 3.5 D&D. Not knowing the rules is not a bad thing because at the end of the day, it's a learning experience. Take me, for example, I've been running TTRPGs for over a decade, and I learn a new rule every time I play, even to this day. Whether it be how a class feature works, how a spell works, how an item works, how something works, a game mechanic, we always learn something new. And that will just continue like that. I don't think anyone knows every single rule of D&D, but I could be wrong about that too, or any TTRPG. But back to the idea that the rules are changing. But the other big thing is that, like I said before with the Matt Mercer effect, each table is different. Well, how could it be different if we all use the same rule set? And that's the fun part. We don't. There are things called house rules, where if something is stupid in the book, we opt to do something else. Case in point, drinking a potion is a action as per the rules as written, but everyone has house ruled it as a bonus action. So much so that is one of the updates coming in the update coming later this year to the current edition of D&D. So it is okay to not know all the rules of D&D. You don't need to know every rule, but I'm going to tell you right now, you should know some rules. Case in point, you should know what the skills do. If you want to run or play D&D, you should know what the skills do, so that way when you want to do something, you know what role is associated with it. Case in point, if you wanted to tell if somebody's lying to you, or to tell what their true intentions are, that used to be called sense motive. In 5th edition, that turned into insight, and in Call of Cthulhu, that is psychology. They are all doing the same thing, but they all have different names. In the case of not knowing the rules, in my own personal experience, I was running a Call of Cthulhu game where my friends were asking me how do they do an insight check, and I was struck because I was didn't know. I didn't know which one it was. We had to go through the book and look it up, and that's how we learned it was psychology. So that's an example of I didn't know the rules, but I was running the game anyway. And that's how some people learn. Sometimes you gotta fumble, dust yourself off, and that's how you learn, and there's nothing wrong with that. But definitely, I would do a once over of each of the skills to see what they do, what they encompass. So if your player asks you, hey, how do I look for something that's hidden? And that's either a spot hidden check, or an investigation roll, or is it a perception roll? What is the difference? Well, read the books and learn the difference. And then get back to me because I don't actually know mechanically what the difference between investigation and perception is. I've just kind of made it up as one is more in depth than the other. But moving along, the other thing you should learn how to do is run a combat scenario. Now, combat is inevitable in Dungeons & Dragons, and it's a power fantasy. So Dungeons & Dragons is a game where you should learn how combat works because it's going to happen. A game where like Call of Cthulhu, however, where the investigators are actively trying to avoid combat, you would still want to learn it anyway if you're the dungeon master, but it's not as important as Dungeons and Dragons or things like Pathfinder or other similar TTRPGs where combat and being strong is the fantasy of the game. So I would say learn the rules of combat. How do you calculate defenses, armor class, saving throws? How do you calculate offensive stuff like making attack rolls, casting spells, and other options that players have in combat, such as non-lethal damage is one that I think we often forget. You know, what are some of the other things they can do besides attack people? Can they throw something? Can they push somebody? So these are some of the things that as a dungeon master you want to learn as well. And then there's of course how to make a character. Now, even though you're the dungeon master and you have NPCs, it's important for you to tell the players how to make their characters. So you got to learn how to do that so that way you can tell your players make your character at level 3 using the elite race system, using the backgrounds from the player's handbook. You may use any of the official Wizards of the Coast books when it comes to choosing classes and subclasses. If you have any questions, come back to me. Didn't that sound official? I may have also spoken a little too fast, and I apologize. But that's some of the basic stuff you may want to learn for Dungeons and Dragons. The next one is not being prepared enough. Now, this is a tip that people used to give, and recently the D&D community has fought back on this one, and that was do not over prepare. And I used to believe in this tip because I used to over prepare all the time. But if you're a dungeon master that's brand new, you have no idea what that means. So I'm going to tell you the opposite. You should over prepare. And that's a little bit probably too far on the other side of the spectrum, but my point being is that you don't know what you don't need to prepare. So whatever you think you need to prepare, absolutely do it, but don't lose sight that you're trying to run a game. But I will give you some tips on some things you don't need to prepare just to get the game going, okay? Some of these things are the world. You don't need to make a world from scratch unless you really want to, but that may take a long time before you can actually get a game going. For your first few games, until you're ready to make a world, just use the Forgotten Realms or Greyhawk or Eberron or any setting you can find online. Most likely the setting you're trying to create probably exists already that you could just tweak a couple things and there you go. So you don't need to make countries and towns and kingdoms and important NPCs, gods even. It's all existing, so you can forego doing that yourself. If you want to, by all means, but it's a lot less work you gotta do if you just use what's already there. That's what I do, and this saved me a lot of headaches. Really, for what I do, and this is me personally, so you don't have to follow my lead. I just make the story. I come up with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Hopefully that went in the right direction on the video. And I let my players fill in the blanks. So I don't come up with every little detail because a saying that I say is that you can come up with 100 scenarios for D&D. Your player will come up with the 101 scenario you did not come up with. So again, this just is something I learned from experience. I used to plan everything. I used to plan that if my friends made a right out of town, they would come across this, and then they make a left. And I'd say, okay, well, they made a left, so now I have to come up with something over here. It made me very good at improv, but it was very, very chaotic, and I was very frustrated, and I just got to where I am. So this is a very much a trial and error thing, and you're just gonna have to get into it. And the other thing is, and the last thing, is anxiety. It is anxiety inducing to be the person in charge of everything. You got to come up with the story, like I said. You got to get people together, make sure their characters are good. You got to come up with the NPCs that they come across and their names. Oh, their names. You got to come across all the items they're going to find, the rewards for the quest themselves, the monsters, the big bad evil guy. Why are they the big bad evil guy? And just all this stuff. And you're going to feel like you're not good enough. You're going to feel like everything you came up with sucks. You're going to feel like that everything you worked so hard was for nothing. And I'm going to tell you right now, it wasn't. And there's only one person that feels that way, and that's yourself. Every time I come up with a game, I still have these feelings. I have a short adventure that I'm preparing to run for my friends that takes place in a fantasy Japan setting. And I am terrified it's going to go wrong. Meanwhile, I've been playing with these guys for, again, over a decade. And this anxiety won't go away. I'm going to be honest with you. It will never go away. But you can stave it off and you can find ways to get around it, because you know what helps is when your players say they had fun. At the end of the day, your job as a dungeon master is to ensure that everyone, including yourself, had fun at that day's session. This is why it's important to communicate with your players so that way you can get that anxiety out of you. Communicate with your players to see what they want, compare that with what you want, tell them what you want, and so they know, and then you won't have any mishaps. You don't have to tell them the whole adventure, obviously, that would ruin the fun, be very spoilery, but the point is that you tell them your expectations. If the example of my Japanese fantasy game, I tell them, hey guys, this takes place in fantasy Japan, and then they come to the table with European musketeers, I'll sit there and go, I'm just going to drop rocks on all your heads and kill y'all. But that's why you discuss these things with your players. And this is why session zeros are important. Again, maybe I'll make a video on that, but my point being is that the anxiety you have that you are not good enough, the only person that's really agreeing with that is yourself, and telling you is yourself. So I'm going to be the first one to tell you that you are good enough to be a dungeon master. You're creative, you're smart, you're awesome, your hair looks great today, and that outfit, awesome. That shirt looks great on you. I'm just some random idiot on the internet, so you can take that with a grain of salt, but hey, I hope something I said means something to someone out there. And if you got some value out of this video, give me a thumbs up. If you want to dispute anything I said, comment down below. If you just want to say, hey, thanks for the video, that works too. Share it with your friends. If you have a friend that's a dungeon master that is worried about being amazing or wants to be the next Matt Mercer, then send me their way, and we'll see, if we can't make things better for everybody. But remember, D&D is a game. It's all about having fun, and it's not meant to be stress-inducing. All right? So, I hope you enjoyed your time here at the D&D Dojo. Again, my name is Kojo Denojo. Happy adventuring, and go make some great stories.